Turns out Apple Podcasts might finally be getting its act together.
And now, a look at this week in podcasting news. It's the Jag Show Podcast.
I haven't been shy in recent weeks about sharing my dismay at Apple Podcasts' new updates. Starting in May, shows weren't updating, new shows were taking forever to be approved, and people who make money off of their podcasts were getting hit hard. Well, there is good news. James Cridland of PodNews says Apple seems to have fixed their bugs by the end of July, and numbers are starting to come back up. And here's what I've seen. The most recent podcast I created, Crazy Radio Stories, was approved the day I submitted it, and new episodes seem to be appearing in Apple Podcasts very quickly. And for podcast listeners, the most prominent button is Latest Episode, so make sure your last episode is good. Then this week, I started getting notifications about dead podcasts being removed from Apple. Turns out, for clients that stopped podcasting and even canceled their podcast hosting service, the shows were still sitting there just parked in Apple Podcasts. Seems a purge is happening. Now, important to note, Apple is not deleting your podcasts if you haven't created content in a while. They're only deleting shows that no longer have an active RSS feed. The other big name in podcasting, Spotify, put out a press release last week explaining how more of its shows are now on Spotify only. The release reads in part, "It is our priority to keep our world-class content both accessible and free to all users across the globe." If you ask me, that sentence rings pretty hollow if you want people to have access and the content is on your platform but nobody else's. You can read the press release in today's show notes. Speaking of Spotify, they're launching a new weekly exclusive podcast called Sunday Scaries, focusing on dealing with the sense of impending doom that hits you on Sunday as the work or school week approaches. It's actually produced by Headspace. Mental health companies have become a big player in podcast advertising, and it's nice to see them getting into the content side as well. Show launches this Sunday, trailers on Spotify, and linked in today's show notes. Bill Simmons' The Ringer, also owned by Spotify, has announced an expanded partnership with the WWE on a series of podcasts. NPR has launched paid subscriptions to some of their biggest shows, including Fresh Air, Code Switch, and How I Built This. $2.99 a month for each show will help support the show and get you sponsor-free content. Now, I go back to my original point about paid podcasts. You'd better have a well-established, exceptional, unique product if you're going to expect people to pay for it. But if anyone can do it, it's NPR. They were in podcasting before just about anybody. There are tons of ways to promote your podcast across social media and the web, and depending on your team and the bandwidth that you and or your team have, you really can do a lot. Ariel Nissenblatt of Squadcast had a great Twitter thread that went viral last week, talking about all the things they do to promote their show between two mics. Even if you don't have a team like they do, you might pick up a couple ideas. And finally, Riverside's remote video recording platform has launched their 2.0 version. It features a quote-unquote magic editor, which will let you put the show together on its own. You are limited by the AI. And speaking of AI, it uses AI to switch between active speakers depending on who's talking, and they're also offering automatic transcription. There's a link to their press release from PodNews about Riverside 2.0. If you want to get this podcast as a newsletter in your email box every week and not rely on social media algorithms to get my content, just go to jagindetroit.com/subscribe. As always, stay healthy and stay safe. I will talk to you next week. Later.
If you like what you just heard, share The Jag Show with someone else who's interested in podcasts. You can also follow The Jag Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For help creating or improving your podcast, visit jagindetroit.com.